Right, let's get into potentially based Robert Kennedy Jr. So before I get into that, first of all, I will quickly mention the website because we have been demonetized by the evil Californians. So come over to the website and sign up there. And we've got lots of interesting stuff, including this symposium on Oikophobia, Western anti-Westernism, which is quite an interesting segment. Right, so Harry, I have found a Democrat that I like. It's true. Or more accurately, I should say, I have found another Democrat that I like because I can't help myself. I absolutely adore AOC.
Oh no, I saw a picture being bandied about. Just show the picture, John.
I like this picture.
I wonder why. Show the picture, John.
Go on, John. Go on, John. He doesn't. There we go.
You're such a Coomer, Dan. You are such a Coomer. For God's sake.
I fully appreciate that. I mean, first of all, that photo is quite evocative of her. For those of you listening, she's tying back her hair with a sort of coquettish grin on her face. So this is very much the early stages.
I'm bowing out.
This is
done. I'm gone.
This is very much the early stages of socialism, where promises are being made, and then later on, I fully appreciate.
Do I have to bring up the Thomas Sowell quote?
I fully appreciate that later on she'll be shooting me in the back of the head in a trench because socialism always goes there. But I still kind of.
But you'll still enjoy the good times while they're happening.
There is that. But no, there is another Democrat that I liked for entirely different reasons. Robert Kennedy Jr., who is. Perhaps the sensible centre version of a Democrat. He's actually very much like what the Democrats used to be in the sort of 60s and 70s before they all went completely mad, where you sort of disagreed with them on a few points, but, basically you had a lot of overlap and sort of seemed very sensible. So we got some clips to get into from RFK, and I should warn you, he has got some sort of slight vocal issue that makes him sound like he's trying to do that Californian vocal fry thing that teenage girls have started doing out there.
I'm pretty sure Californians just all have a particularly irritating twang to their accent, and I'm sorry anybody from California listening to it. It's just something I've noticed.
They've probably got a power cut at the moment, so they won't be able to listen. But no, he's quite simple. Let's do some background on him from Wikipedia, because of course, if you want to know something, you go to California, you go to Wikipedia because they know stuff. So Wikipedia explains that Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. is an American environmental lawyer and member of the prominent Kennedy family, a 2024 Democratic Party presidential candidate, and an author known for conspiracy theories. So,
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, starting to like him already, actually.
We've got one of his books in the office.
Yes. Oh, I'm going to mention that. In April 2023, Kennedy announced his presidency for the Democratic nomination. Kennedy was born in 1954, so very nearly peak boomer. Peak boomer is 1956, but he's pretty close. He's son of Robert F. Kennedy, and he is nephew of John F. Kennedy, so JFK. Now, when he was 9 years old, his uncle, JFK, was assassinated in 1963, and when he was 14, his father was assassinated while running for the Democratic president. And in fact, his father had just won the nomination at that point, so he was basically on line to be the president.
Would he have been taking over from LBJ?
Probably that would have lined up. I would imagine. And in Wikipedia goes on to explain that in November 2021, and I think this is a book that you're mentioning, Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci.
Yep.
Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy was published, where, and I'm quoting from Wikipedia here, Kennedy alleged, without presenting any plausible evidence, that Fauci sabotaged treatments for AIDS, violated federal law, conspired with Bill Gates and social media such as Facebook to suppress information about COVID-19 cures, to leave the vaccine as the only option to fight the pandemic. Wow.
Do they present any evidence to show that he didn't present any plausible evidence, or do they just state it?
No, Wikipedia just asserts this.
Oh, okay, all right.
That becomes a narrative. So I thought it might be quite interesting, actually, because I have to find he is still a Democrat, so he still believes.
I have seen a clip of him saying that people who question the climate narrative should be thrown in prison. I don't know when it's from.
Yeah.
So it could be a while back. He might have changed his views on it.
He looks a lot younger than he will in these. But I thought what we could do is we could have a look at a couple of things and see if he doesn't start to grow on us a little bit. Let's have a look at the first clip about the Ukraine war.
The answer to your question about how we got in this war goes back a long way, but I would say that the real story starts in 2014 when the U.S. government, and particularly the neocons in the White House and elsewhere, participated and supported the violent overthrow, a coup d'etat against the democratically elected government of the Ukraine, and put in a very, very anti-Russian government. This prompted the Russians, who then believed that the U.S. Navy was now going to be invited into the Black Sea to have a port at Crimea. It prompted the Russians to preemptively invade Crimea. At the same time, the government that came into the Ukraine began enacting a series of laws that turned the Russian populations of the Donbass region into second-class citizens. They illegalized essentially their culture, their language, and they began ultimately killing them. They killed 14,000 of them. And it prompted a civil war in the country. And the Russian response, which it was illegal, I have no sympathy or toward Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is a gangster and he's a thug, but his response in the Donbass was not irrational.
That is some very anti-narrative chat going on.
That certainly is. I don't know enough about Ukraine to comment on the accuracy of his figures about killing 14,000 ethnic Russians in the Donbass region, but it is very interesting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he is completely off the script on that one. I mean, you get completely closed down in online discussion of any sort and sort of any sort of mainstream discussion if you add any historical context to the Ukraine conflict.
To be fair, whether or not he is a Democrat or not and has some crazy beliefs that I disagree with, you can definitely see that what he is essentially doing is breaking political kayfabe, which is why they want to label him as some kind of conspiracy theorist and all sorts.
It gets a lot worse than this.
Oh, really?
As we go through, yeah, absolutely. Let's throw in a quick one about Taiwan.
I would stop looking at it as a threat right now and allow the Chinese and the Taiwanese to come to their own solution about what kind of relationship they have. And I think that if we stop our provocations toward the Chinese, that would naturally de-escalate.
So I'm not sure to what extent I agree on this one, because the Taiwanese issue is incredibly difficult to navigate. But again, he's if you listen to the way he's talking about this, he's not trying to be a warmonger. He's not trying to escalate into a conflict with China, which, certain elements of the, should we say, the State Department of the US establishment is clearly very interested in doing. There was always a drive for more and more war. Let's keep the Ukraine war running for as long as possible, even though it's completely unviable, even though they are now basically snatching teenage boys off the street in Kiev and funneling them to the front line. I saw a horrendous video the other day where basically a mother was driving. She had her two teenage boys in the back of her car. She was a Ukrainian mother driving through Kiev, and the army stopped her and basically tried to wrestle the boys out the back of the car so that they could be sent off to the front line. That war is horrendous, and he's speaking out against it. And there he is talking about Taiwan. Basically, he's talking about de-escalation, about not confronting China, about not trying to push towards the next war. And that is just extraordinary, because the Democrats have become basically the war party. At this point, there is no war that they don't like, and a lot of, probably most of the Republican Party in the sort of...
I would imagine they operate upon uniparty lines.
Yeah, very much so. I'm sure the military-industrial complex pays off both sides. But, I mean, the Democrats are especially captured, and you just never hear any of them breaking party line on that. So there's two positions that are quite remarkable. Let's hear what he has to say on the economy, because that's also interesting.
We have this obviously kind of never-ending debt spiral that's going to cause a massive crisis, whether it's not this year, maybe it's in 5 years or 10 years. Right now, it's projected Social Security will go bankrupt in 2035, 2034, around that range. So this is coming up fast. What are we going to be cutting besides defense, or are we going to be raising taxes to 70%, do you think, to kind of bridge this hole?
I can't answer that question any better than I already have. I think there are targets for opportunity in the Homeland Security. I think once we stop fighting these wars all over the world, there's a lot less need for us to have a surveillance state at home. So the real cost in the military is 1.1 trillion a year, not just the 800 trillion that shows up on the books. And I think those are targets for opportunity. And I can't, I need to study more the issue about how to get back into a balanced budget. One of the things I'd say disturbs me.
Yeah. So, first of all, I like the fact that, he acknowledges the debt problem. He acknowledges the issue. He does talk about the sort of very heavy amounts that the US is spending on military and the surveillance state. Of course, a lot of that's getting turned against American citizens as well. So that's something I recognise. He's not gone in there with the sort of the normal politician saying that he's got all the answers and he's giving these sort of smooth points. He does say that he wouldn't cut Social Security or Medicare, and that's a red line for him. Well, fair enough, but it's very, very difficult to address the sort of problems that the US has with the sort of spiral, the debt spiral they got themselves into, without looking at those two things. But he certainly does. He's certainly not one of these politicians who is, we cannot cut anything ever. Which most
he seems willing to make difficult decisions,
and I didn't include all of it here because of, obviously time pressures, but he goes on to talk about, other things that the US has spent money on. So, he points out that the US spent $8 trillion on the Iraq War. And not only did they get nothing for it, they got less than nothing for it. They destabilized the Middle East. It caused 2 million refugees to flood into Europe, and of course Europe is now destabilized as a result of that. And all the sort of, the Iraqi lives and the US lives were wasted in that. And, $8 trillion spent on that for nothing in return. And another thing that I absolutely love that he's really sound on is he talks about the 16 trillion that was spent on the scamdemic. 16 trillion for nothing.
Yeah.
To basically just shut down the world to keep 90-year-olds imprisoned in
16 trillion so that you can destroy the economy, so that when you do open up the economy, then there's not going to be many places where an extra 16 trillion is going to be coming from.
Certainly destroy the economy of small businesses. Of course, all the large businesses were allowed to stay open and accumulate market
essential workers.
Market share. Yeah, exactly. Media was allowed to go on. Politicians were allowed to go on. A lot of government employees were allowed to go on, but small businesses were not. He talked about the insanity of sending 100 billion to Ukraine to prolong an unwinnable war. He also acknowledges inflation. He does make quite a good point on that. Let's listen to this next quick bit.
The inflation that we've created from just printing money is making my friend Keith's food twice expensive. So the cost of staples in this country was raised by 76% in 2 years. And now they're cutting his food stamps and bailing out the same month $300 million, the Silicon Valley Bank. We got to, it doesn't make any sense. And having this kind of conversation, how do we screw the poor to make sure that we can milk them while we're doing all of this great? This country is acting like the alcoholic who is behind on his mortgage and who takes the milk money and goes into the bar and buys rounds for strangers. That's what you're dealing with.
That's a pretty good analogy.
That is a really good analogy for what the US is doing. So
I like the acknowledgement that it's money printing as well.
Yeah.
Thank God somebody within the system, you could say, acknowledged it.
Yeah, they never acknowledge it. The Fed, crazily, they don't even acknowledge the debt. And here he is talking about all of these things. He is clearly being intellectually honest. So even though when we're going to come on a bit later, some of the environmental stuff, you and I are going to disagree with him. I think we can agree that this is a man who is trying to be intellectually honest and see things for the way they are. Right. Now, all of the stuff so far, that was the tame stuff. Now we're going to get into the spicier elements of some of the stuff we believe. Because you remember I mentioned before that his uncle, JFK, was assassinated by the CIA when he was 9, and his father when he was 14. Now he's been pretty clear that the CIA were involved in both of those assassinations, and he sort of strongly hints between the lines.
I've not watched the Tucker segment, but I'm pretty sure I remember hearing there was a Tucker segment that pretty much confirmed it.
Yeah. Let's hear perhaps why the CIA might have wanted to assassinate his uncle and father.
my uncle realized that he had been lied to by Charles Bell and Alan Dulles and Richard Bissell, the heads of the CIA, as well as his Joint Chiefs. And he came out in the middle of the invasion when it turned against them, and he realized these men were being killed on the beach, and he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. So he recognized that the function of the intelligence agencies had devolved, and that they had become captive of the military-industrial complex and the military contractors, and their function was essentially to provide our nation with a constant pipeline of new wars.
Okay.
Yeah, that is.
You are starting to bring me around on it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. So, I mean, he correctly identifies that the purpose of the CIA is to stir up conflict so that there can be a forever war somewhere that the military-industrial complex can be feeding. He talks there about the fact that his uncle JFK, shortly before he was assassinated, realised that the CIA was lying to him, and he told them that he's going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and shortly after that he was assassinated. And then he goes on to say in another part of the interview that the first phone call his father made, because his father was JFK's brother, the first phone call that his father made after realising that his brother had been killed was he rang the CIA and said, "Did you do this?" And obviously his father became convinced that the CIA did kill his brother, and then he ran. So Bobby Kennedy, he then ran for president, and he got the Democratic nomination, and he almost certainly would have been president, and then he was assassinated just after he won the nomination, and it was pinned on a guy who was this Palestinian guy who fired 13 shots at his father, as the story goes, and has now been in jail for the last 50, 60 years, whatever it is now. And his gun carried 8 shots. And yet he managed to fire 13 at Bobby Kennedy. And not only that, is he managed to shoot him in the back, even though he stood in front of him. And he's actually been to see the man in prison who is accused, or who's being held in prison for having killed his father. And he's quite convinced that, no, it was the CIA who killed his father and his uncle.
Very interesting.
And of course, you got the motivation, because he said he was going to take them apart. Right, and now, the next one is even spicier. This is where, and I hope we don't have to edit this bit out for YouTube. If we do, come and see us on the website, or come and see us on Rumble, because I'm going to have a word with our in-house team of people who know about how bad the censorship is.
I've seen some YouTube channels get away with talking about certain things.
Well, we're quoting, we're letting him speak in his own terms, but this is eye-opening. Listen to what he says about this.
We're going to get out of the vaccine business, and you're going to be left without a vaccine supply unless you give us full immunity from liability. And Reagan, reluctantly signed that. And so today, no matter how negligent the company, no matter how grievous your injury, no matter how reckless their conduct, you cannot sue them. That caused a gold rush, because now you've got a product that there's no downstream liability. You're immune from that. There's no upstream safety testing, so that's a $250 million saving. And there's no marketing or advertising costs, because the federal government is going to mandate this product to 76 million American children, whether they like it or not. And there's no better product in the world. And so there was a gold rush, and instead of 3 vaccines, we quickly ended up with 72, and now we're going to, toward 80 right now. And there's no end in sight. And a lot of those vaccines were
so that is a fascinating can of worms that he's picking up there, and then of course, and I hope this bit survives the YouTube censorship. But if not, come and join us on the website to see the unedited version. But here he talks about Operation Warp Speed, and this one, wow,
had to declassify its organizational charts to show to the FDA committee called VRBPAC when they demanded it. And Warp Speed went in and showed them the organizational charts. The agency running Warp Speed and pandemic response was not HHS. It was NSA, the National Security Agency. Avril Haines is the director of national intelligence. So she was running Operation Warp Speed. And who was manufacturing? It wasn't Pfizer and Moderna. It was 140 military contractors who had lines ready. And you say, and all of this clampdown on civil rights that we saw, the censorship, the closing of the churches, the closing of the right to assemble, the banning of jury trials against pharmaceutical companies. They crushed the Seventh Amendment, the First Amendment. They closed down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. They obliterated the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, no, that is incredible. The NSA was running Operation Warp Speed, and he's got receipts for all of this stuff. So, I mean, you can go to the books he's published or his website, and
I can't wait to see the Wikipedia counter argument.
Yeah, well, the Wikipedia counter argument. But I mean, the stuff that he's saying there, that is from court disclosures or Freedom of Information requests. He's not making it up. All of that stuff, he's got receipts and evidence for all of that stuff. And the NSA was running Operation Warp Speed. And what he said, I can't repeat. I'm not going to repeat it. But the stuff that he said about how a certain substance was produced by military contractors. I mean, wow,
it's not great.
Yeah. So and look, for me, the pandemic is what got me into doing this in the first place, because I was so outraged by that period. And for me, politics is not really a question of right or left anymore, or blue team or red team or anything like that. It's holding people accountable for the crimes of lockdown. And this man seems to want to do it. So you can see why I'm really warming to him. There are aspects to his policy which I won't show you any clips on, which I'm not a fan on. He is in the green lobby.
Yes.
He is anti-nuclear. And he's just wrong on that, because he thinks that nuclear isn't safe because of because of Chernobyl and so on. Modern nuclear reactors are perfectly fine. He thinks
it's a shame that he can see past the propaganda in some places, but not in others.
Yeah, but to be fair, if he were to smash the CIA, end the US's warmongering, and give us lockdown justice, I could handle there not being any nuclear power stations. I mean, America can afford it. They've got loads of oil and gas.
Yeah.
They can do without.
Yeah, I can take it. If we're going to go on trade-offs, then that's a fair trade-off.
Some other stuff on the woke nonsense. He's anti men playing in women's sport if they just put on some lipstick.
Fair.
So that's sensible. He does the whole bodily autonomy thing. So he's generally in favour of Democrats being able to kill their own children in the womb. But they're doing it anyway, so again, trade-offs. He thinks gender reassignment should be reserved for adults only. So he gives them a little bit.
He's still doing half measures in a lot of places,
but it's better than the full-on lunacy.
But I do believe, at core, a lot of problems in the world are caused by the things that he is mainly railing against.
Final clip that I'm going to show you, him talking about the mainstream media.
I mean, what is a newscaster supposed to do? Are they supposed to manipulate public information? Is their job to protect Americans from dangerous thoughts? Are they audiences? Do they have such contempt for their audiences that they think that the audiences can't make up their own minds? And what is their whole vision about the traditional role of the American media as the guardians of free speech and the First Amendment in this country?
Yeah. He sees the mainstream media for what they are. He sees the CIA for what they are. He sees the military-industrial complex for what it is. He sees Big Pharma for what it is. He doesn't see the eco-lobby for what it is, but to be fair...
What do you think his prospects are?
I think that if he won the Democratic primary, he would be assassinated just like his uncle and his father. There is no way they are going to let this man get into the White House. He's going after the military-industrial complex, the CIA and Big Pharma. Not a chance.
So what you would recommend if he was going to try and run seriously, he would probably want to get some kind of private military contractor to defend him.
At minimum. I mean, the list of people that he's going after. I mean, I don't think it will come to that anyway, because as we know, Democratic primaries are more fortified than. So they will make sure that he
more
doesn't
free
get
and
anywhere
fair.
near it. But his poll numbers are really good, and just as a hypothetical, I mean, honestly, I would have to stop and think if it was. I mean, I don't get a vote in the US election anyway, but if it was Trump or him, I'd have to stop and think, because I mean, I like both of them, but the problem is Trump still thinks that Operation Warp Speed was a brilliant thing. He thinks what he did on vaccines was brilliant. He's very non-committal on lockdowns, especially the early ones that he brought in. I would hope that if Trump came back into office, he would go after the intelligence agencies after they did what they did to him. But I mean, that guy had his father and uncle assassinated. So, I mean, he's not going to be messing around in the slightest.
No,
so,
certainly not.
really interesting character. And I think Democrats should choose him and the CIA should not assassinate him, because it'd be a very interesting election if that man went through.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium contents on the site, such as the Symposium series, this episode on the Politics of Aristotle, Part 2. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.